what's going on, y'all? So today we're going to talk about how to become great at lifting and running, and not only how to become great, but how to get those results really quickly. You know, it's really common when someone's getting started lifting or running for them to start out with a lot of motivation. You know, a lot of people will start out with that intensity with their training. They'll have the motivation. They'll be training really, really hard, but the results just seem to be coming very slow, and it seems like they'll never become great. And honestly, they won't unless they do the right things. It's really common for a lot of people to train for years and years and years on end and only get mediocre results. You know, a really common thing is with runners to just go ahead when they start, buy new running shoes, get a running watch, and just head out the door and start logging miles. No methodical way of doing it, anything like that. Same thing with lifters. You know, someone trying to put on muscle might go ahead and get a split off of bodybuilding.com and start following that. But if that's how you go about doing this and you don't follow these 4 points, after years go by, you'll have mediocre results at best. If you follow these 4 points, you can become actually great and do it really quickly. You know, this is the exact reason why growing up I hated running. I was in cross country, track, did a couple marathons before I'm even getting to college, and I still did not love running. And I wasn't getting good at it. You know, I was never a talented runner. And then when it came to lifting, I went through a period of time in the beginning where the results just weren't coming quick. And I knew I wanted to have much, much better results than just going out and slogging miles on the trail, going, spending time in the gym, and only getting some out of it. You know, if I was gonna put that work in, I wanted to make sure I was getting a lot of it. So these 4 points is what, one, allowed me to go from not liking running very much to getting a 9-hour 50 miler and loving that. And then shortly after, going ahead and becoming a pro bodybuilder in the IFBB. So these 4 points are very, very, very critical. All right, just finished up with that 6 miles, just 6 easy miles on the trail. So let's go ahead and get into these 4 points. So like I mentioned out there, you know, growing up, I definitely did not feel talented at all with running. You know, I definitely felt like one of the slower guys on the cross country and the track team. And even though I could go out and slog through a marathon, definitely did not feel talented at that. So a few years ago, you know, when I was coming off of a period of time of essentially no training, I had been doing no lifting, no running for quite some time after I'd left the fire department, just focusing on my business. I decided to go ahead and get back into running. And I essentially wanted to go from couch to running my first ultra marathon, which was a 50K. And I believe I gave myself, I want to say 5 or 6 month lead period. So it's essentially couch to 50K and a short-ish period of time of you know, coming off of no training. So I decided to do things different than I had ever done before. And before I just decided to go out and just start running, rather than doing, you know, more pace-based training or just finding a half marathon training plan online and following that like I had done in the past, I decided to really, really get methodical with it and do quite a bit of research. So I did quite a bit of research, finding out what were the top guys doing, what were the top endurance guys doing and ultra endurance guys doing. And one thing I saw is that most of, especially the ultra endurance guys, they were doing a lot of their runs heart rate based, specifically running most of their miles easy in zone 2. And then that's where I discovered MAF training, MAF. And the MAF running completely changed the game for me. And this is where I had to start in the beginning, essentially dropping the ego, because to do MAF training right, I had to train differently than I had ever trained before. And I had to do quite a bit of run walking. I was going a lot slower than I ever expected I'd have to. And this is out, you know, public trails, having to essentially walk all of that, but I didn't care. Because of this though, because of training the right way, I saw improvements come incredibly fast. And then within a little over a year, I believe it was, I ran 50 miles in 9 hours and 3 minutes. Right after that ultra marathon, that's then when I decided to go all in with bodybuilding and become a professional bodybuilder in the IFBB. I knew in order to do this, I couldn't just follow a plan off of bodybuilding.com and do things like I had done in the past back in college days. You know, in college, I was just following a regular split, doing a little bit of basic research with nutrition, all of that. This time I decided to do a ton of research before I just jumped into the goal of trying to become a pro bodybuilder. So what I did is I chose 3 to 5 of the top pros, the top open bodybuilder pros. They know how to put on size the fastest and most efficiently. So I followed them and I saw what were the similarities within their training, within their diet, how they lived, everything that allowed them to essentially, be who they were. So that's then when I decided, or that's then when I found high intensity bodybuilding, reverse pyramid bodybuilding, which is much unlike anything you'd see on a bodybuilding.com split or anything like that. Most people train with high volume, not high intensity. I've talked about this in several videos, but this is where I discovered that. I was seeing that the top guys, most of them were training in a way that was different than just going in the gym and following just a split. So this is point number one. Point number one is probably the most important. If you ever want to become great at lifting or running, you got to do your research on how to train appropriately. I can't tell you how many times I've had a guy come up to me struggling on getting his miles up. I actually had one a couple weeks ago that he's been running for several months now, and he's been kind of stuck in the 20-30 mile range, and he's seen me over the last 4 to 5 weeks go from no running at all to all the way back to up almost to 40 miles a week this week, and he was confused on why that was. He essentially was like what I talked about before, the point before, of someone just going out and just running and just running hard. And I've talked a lot about before the yellow zone, the dead zone with running, and how that's something that you want to avoid at least on most of your runs. But this is the point. Most people out there, the vast majority of people, are going to have the motivation and have the willingness to train hard. But training hard isn't always the equivalent of training smart. You got to train smart. And in order to train smart, you got to know what you're doing. And that comes with immense levels of research. So in the beginning, before you ever get started, go ahead and do the research on how the top pros are training, how they're eating, how they're living. And then you can go ahead and formulate your plan based off that. Because even though you're not going to be able to train how they train, exactly how they train, because you won't have that experience yet, this is where starting with the same kind of basic framework and training in the same style is then going to allow you to progress up really, really, really quickly. And that's where I went from essentially doing the 50 miler in, I believe, February of 2020. And then I turned pro in bodybuilding in December of 2021. And it was purely because I followed this. I did the research in the very beginning to find out what it takes to become a pro, and then I lived that. And that's going to come down to point number 2. So point number 2, just because you do the research, you come up with the plan of how the pros train, you still have to scale it to your ability. So you're going to find out how the pros train. So on the running side, let's take an ultra endurance runner, for example. Most of the runs are going to be easy runs in zone 2. For a bodybuilder, that could be high intensity bodybuilding. You've now got the plan in place to where you're going to run all those miles. You're going to do all that. In zone 2, you're going to lift with high intensity, doing reverse pyramid style training. With that being said, you still have to scale it to the volume of your ability. So you have the framework based off of your research that you've done, you've got the framework for how to train like a pro. This doesn't mean you can just go ahead and come out of the gate training to that extent, training to that scale or that volume. So this is where go ahead and train in the same style. So, if you're trying to be an ultra endurance runner, you're going to do most of your runs in zone 2 or MAF training. But you might not be starting out running as many miles as, top pro, or you might not be running at the same speed. It's still going to be scaled down to your ability. But you're still training in the same style. So you're still going to be getting those benefits just based off of where you're at in the process. Same thing goes on the lifting side. You might go ahead and come up with an incredible split. It might be a low to moderate volume split, maybe a push-pull legs variation split. But you're probably not going to be able to do the volume that a pro can do because he's built up the ability to handle that volume and need that volume over the years. Same thing with strength. You're not going to be able to lift the same amount of weight as the pro. You got to scale it to your ability. So the first point is do the research. This is the point that most people don't do at all. Most people just go out and start training. You got to do the research on how to appropriately train the right way, then scale it to your ability. Use that as a framework, as a guideline of how to train, but then scale it to your ability. Don't just come out of the gate and get yourself injured trying to train literally identically like a pro. And then that leads over to point number 3.
All right, so point number 3 is definitely needed if you ever want to become great. And if you want to become great quickly, this is definitely the way to do that. So point number 3 is you have to train with intensity. So just like I talked about how most people in the beginning have all the motivation in the world, they're willing to train hard. Even with that, most people don't know how to appropriately train with maximum intensity. Now, this is something that is learned. It's something that comes with time, but it is something in the beginning that you can decide that you want to have, and you want to train with the intensity. So first off, you got to go ahead and do the research, and you've got to find how to appropriately train. Because if you're just going out and training hard, you're going to burn yourself out quick. If you're training hard the wrong way, which is frankly what a lot of people do, this is where most people only last 3 months, 6 months, maybe a year at most, before either A, quitting, or B, just deciding that they're only going to succumb to these just mediocre results for the rest of their life. If you're going to train with intensity, which you need to if you ever want to become great, you've got to do so with the right proper training, and that's where point number 1 comes in. But then you've got to go ahead and train with that intensity. So that means on the lifting side, that means taking most of your sets to failure, and knowing what actual true failure means, not actually having 2 or 3 left in the tank when you are calling it failure. This means actually when it's failure, or when you're going out on a long run. That means getting all of the miles, maybe even means getting an extra mile in, but you got to train with that maximum intensity. And then point number 4, and this is a huge one, this is one that I attribute a lot of how I've been able to achieve my goals fairly quickly. You've got to live like a robot. So this is where most people fail. Most people will be consistent for a few days, maybe a few weeks, maybe even a few months. But to be consistent, literally every single day, every single hour you're on, every single meal, every single training session, you don't miss a thing. You live like a robot. This is what the pros do. And this is how the pros, and even those that aren't pros, but those that become great really quickly, this is how they do it. They live like robots, and they have extreme consistency. You got to have that daily, weekly, monthly, yearly consistency over a period of time to really become great. You're not going to become great in a week period of time. You're not going to become great in a month period of time. This takes time to even become great, but you can go ahead and speed up the process drastically. And let's say it takes a regular person maybe 5-6 years of training to become great or good. This is where you can go ahead and greatly shorten that period of time and do it in only a couple years. This is where if you, 1, do the research, find out how to appropriately train. 2, you of course scale that to your ability. 3, you train with that intensity. And then 4, you do that literally every single hour of every single day, and you live like that robot. That's going to be where you become great really quickly. All right, so then a bonus point I've got for you that will really help you become great at running and lifting, and do this really quickly. And this is one of the reasons I attribute of how I've been able to do it fairly quickly, especially me turning pro in such a short period of time. Even though I mentioned you have to do your research and train smart, in this point that I'm about to give you is where, if done wrong, this is where a lot of people can get injured. But as long as you know your body and you're actually smart with it, this is where do a little bit extra. So 1, you've gone ahead and you know how to appropriately train. You've done the research, you train smart, you train intense, you live like a robot with that consistency. Now take it a little bit of an extra step further and add on to it. Whereas you might have on your training plan maybe only 30 miles that week, maybe go ahead and do 32 miles that week or 34 miles that week. Tag on a little bit of extra miles as long as you can handle it. And this is where it comes down to you being smart and knowing your body. If you're getting too beat up and you're just beating yourself into a pulp, you're not going to be doing yourself any favors. But assuming you're recovering well, progressing well, you can keep kind of scaling that up. You'll hear a lot of people talk about overtraining and all of that, and I have experienced that myself, and I've experienced that with other people, but that's typically rare. Typically I see that come more from people who aren't training smart, and who are just freaking going out there like banshees. If you're training smart, a lot of times you'll be able to go ahead and manage doing a little bit extra, but this is where doing that extra is going to allow you to become great a lot faster than if you're doing frankly less volume or less work. If you're able to do more work, the more work is going to lead to faster results. And that's what happened with me. The first ultra marathon I did, I went from couch to probably 50 miles a week within a very, very short period of time. It was definitely not recommended. Most people would recommend it against it, but it worked out extremely well for me. And it's kind of same thing with this go around. Me going from bodybuilding, getting back into trying to run this 100K. I'm ramping up mileage really, really, really quickly, but my body's feeling fantastic. And this is coming from years of me knowing how to feel my body, knowing how much I can take all of that. But if you're willing to actually kind of go the extra mile and do more, you're only going to get more results from it, assuming that you're recovering from it. So those are the 4 points. These 4 points will help you become great at running and lifting so quickly and so much faster than other people. So first one, you gotta go ahead and do your research. And probably the biggest point with this whole entire video is choose the top people of that training modality in that sport and see what they're doing. What are the commonalities? Try to follow exactly what the pros are doing, because obviously that's what works. So one, do your research on how to train smart and how to train the right way. Don't just go ahead and lace up your running shoes and just go out there and run 4 miles just trying to beat a time. You're not going to get all the training benefits out of it if you're training that way. Number 2, go ahead and scale that to your ability. Don't just go ahead and try to train like those pros that you're now following, doing all the volume or maybe the same way, all of that. Scale it to your ability. 3, you got to train with that intensity. You got to have the max intensity, because that absolutely is going to be needed if you ever want to become great in the sport you're training for. And then number 4, live like a robot. The more consistent you can be, the more you can live like a robot every single day, the faster the results are going to come. And then the bonus point I gave y'all is, assuming you know your body and you're recovering well, take it an extra step further. The more training time you put in of training smart, the more you're going to get out of it, and your results are going to come so much faster. But these are my kind of quick tips on how to become great at running and lifting, how to do that really quickly. If you enjoyed this, please go ahead and smash that like button, hit subscribe if you haven't already. Be happy, be positive, be powerful. Have a great rest of your day.